The Harvey Weinstein allegations set up an avalanche of accusations against other well-known male figures in the entertainment, business, and political world. Many famous women have also talked about their experiences of harassment or assault by these men. And #MeToo hashtag has allowed females from all walks of life to discuss their own stories. So how widespread is sexual harassment? What are the key obstacles for legislation on this issue in many countries now? And what can we do to protect our kids and ourselves from possible harassment and abuse? Now to discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Li Jinjiao from the Beijing Foreign Studies University and Mr. Edward Lehman, Senior Research Fellow at Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Ms. Zhang Yanling, Chair of Open Heart Design Alliance. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Li Qiuyuan. So it all started with this sexual harassment investigation against Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, as we mentioned, a very powerful producer who has been in the industry for a long time. Washington Post actually reports that this man has a 30-year pattern of abuse in Hollywood. I'm just wondering why are we talking about this openly now, Professor?
Well, I think the social movement comes in waves. Actually, women have been fighting very actively against the sexual harassment for decades. This is just a new wave of women's activism against the sexual harassment. And in terms of social psychology, I think it's also a kind of shock wave because all these women who are brave enough to stand out, they are powerful, resourceful women. They have played, such as Angelina Jolie, she has played a lot of powerful figures. So we know that they can wield their willpower, their resources to file lawsuits against people like Harvey Weinstein. That's why people are shocked.
Why hasn't this so-called well-known secret been kept for so long? I mean, 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a conspiracy of silence with regards to getting ahead, and that there was this vacuum. When people don't come forward, like this was Rose McGowan, who originally had come forward, and she had a kind of a very difficult upbringing, and at 15 she was emancipated from her family. But we have something called the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and they spend something like $344 million a year just trying to enforce equal opportunity for women and stop sexual harassment and a whole bunch of other things. The companies in the United States, so Weinstein and his brother were running this company, and they could be found to be liable based on the action. So it's not just the individual, but the company has to worry about the liability towards the company and the investors and everything else. And so I think that this kind of was a perfect storm, and there was acrimony between the two brothers about who was going to control this company, and I think that sort of started it. But any way that this comes out, I think, is good. I think that in the discussion to happen is good. So, I mean, but yeah, I mean, the laws are in the books since 1964. This has been around for a long time, and all of a sudden
the first
it's just come.
sexual harassment case was only in 1990, not too long ago.
Well, the first nationwide that caused the sensation was
And that was back in the States.
Kind of, kind of an understanding of what sexual harassment was, which was the Clarence Thomas hearings in the Congress.
1990.
Right, and the woman came forward, and she was talking about the character of Mr. Clarence Thomas, or Judge Clarence Thomas of the Supreme Court, who was a candidate at that time, and there was some unwanted sexual discussion, I think, that was discussed. So this was on live television. Back then, only probably not so many channels, and so everybody saw it, and it was...
So what's it so different now from back then?
I think, according to the story we have heard these days, it has been an open secret for the past 30 years. So we just once again see the power of the transparency of social media, especially the MeToo tag. We've seen this is really strong following, like Professor mentioned, that the women are really strongly respond to that. But I guess it is a good bad news that raise attention and realize we are really becoming a transparent world. Whatever you do, even you have done 30 years, like Kevin Spacey, like we mentioned, they all come back to you. So I guess it will be a very good alarm for the entire collective awareness to raise this consciousness about doing the right thing.
Yeah, it also shows that fighting for gender equality is really an uphill battle. If you stop pushing, you stop fighting, then the momentum will fall back. So this reminds younger generation of women to keep on standing out, to keep on speaking out, and fighting for their rights.
And if you look at this news circle, initially it was celebrities, right? Public figures, like actresses, like Angelina Jolie, big names, they speak out. And then it was followed by personal stories by women in all industries across the world, and we've got this hashtag #MeToo going on. But I was wondering, you know, will this have a long-lasting impact? What happens after the novelty wears off? What happens after the news cycle passes?
Yeah, I mean, a great question. Because the mechanism to enforce this is what becomes debilitating for most of the people who participate. So this could happen to you, and then you've got you got a number of choices, but if you don't have a good support network, then what do? You come forward and you're punished, or triply punished, or like we talked about, this quid pro quo. I mean, you know, I don't think that the mechanism is even in place in the United States. You first have to have an administrative hearing at the EEOC, so you go to an administrative tribunal about sexual harassment, and then you can bring a lawsuit in the United States. So they're putting this buffer, they're saying it's better, who knows. In China, they just don't have the legal mechanism to deal with it at all.
It's empty words. In the protection of women's interests and rights, the Chinese law, we do have the item that says we should protect women from any form of sexual harassment, but there's no clear definition.
No clear definition.
No clear definition. Yeah, no itemization of what will entail sexual harassment and what will be the major aspects of sexual harassment. So it's the legalization process is still in debate, in discussion in China.
And it is incredibly difficult to win a case.
Oh yeah, I mean, we were talking. I mean, so really,
when you're practicing law, what kind of evidence would you be looking out for when you're trying to decide, well, whether we have a case or not?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem.
Question.
Yeah, very good question. In China, it's extremely difficult because there are laws, policies, and regulations. I mean, there would be a criminal law, but it would have to rise to the level of sexual assault, which I mean, assault is being touched in an unwanted way, or rape, which is actually a term of art to describe exactly what
sexual
occurred.
assault.
Yeah, the sexual assault, but having to a specific way. You don't have rape for a man to a man, for example, under Chinese law. You didn't really, under the FBI profiling, up until 2012, you didn't have it either. So, I mean, this is not so crazy, I mean, and unusual, what constitutes rape specifically, and what constitutes sexual assault. And then you have the discussion, like, for example, Sweden has a very low threshold, meaning any kind of touching can be in any orifice can be considered to be rape. So everyone, the world has not got a consensus on it. But yeah, the enforcement in China since 2005, there have been a number of cases, but none of them, to the best of my knowledge, have ever been successful. And some of them have been extremely public, and I think painful for someone who is coming forward, and there isn't a support for that.
For instance, in 2014, there were several very famous cases of professors harassing their students, their women students, and there were several major petitions issued and open letters generated by intellectuals, activists, and professors teaching sex education or promoting sex education in China on the Teachers' Day of 2014. So there was this public discourse and public momentum. But the professors who were on national target, one was asked to leave his teaching post, but he was still the chair of his academic association. So they don't, it's a very, very low price to pay for people to practice sexual harassment against their power inferiors.
Yeah, and
it's hard to gather evidence.
Academic sexual harassment on university campuses where professors coerce sex from their students. How often do you think that is on Chinese campuses?
From my personal experiences, I thought we are discussing really from a very patriotic sense, like sexual harassment has to be men against women. But I guess there should be happening on both ways if it's reality. So especially in China, I see in working places, even campus, probably there's many tragic stories. But in our world, it's becoming everything is so gender neutral. So I totally think that could be a completely the other direction. That I never heard of men's words, but I do. But there is stories and there are happenings. But we're discussing much more on this really powerful men not taking advantage of women. But there are so many power women. I guess the discussion should be considered both ways. That's only my reminder.
And I think another interesting concept you mentioned a little earlier is the term indirect sexual harassment, where Angelina Jolie played in her case. What is it about?
Well, there are two types by the earlier definition, feminist definition of sexual harassment. There is the quid pro quo sexual harassment, meaning interactive person to person, and there is the second category, which is the environment. Hostile environment sexual harassment. So and then a third person, for instance, if a professor practices sexual favoritism to his target student, then the other women who are immediate classmates of this targeted women students, they are also experiencing indirect or third-person sexual harassment because they didn't receive that kind of sexual favoritism. And I also wanted to add about how prevalent the sexual harassment case is on Chinese campus. A very famous NGO activist, her name is Wei Tingting. Earlier this year, she collaborated with other NGOs, and she conducted the most pervasive, most wide survey, and according to her survey, which is mostly self-reported questionnaire filling out through online mechanisms, as much as 70% college students reported being victim of a certain type of sexual harassment. So minor form, and the percentage runs as high as 75% for women, college-age women from Chinese major campuses. But we don't know about the percentage in rural China, because according to two very famous sexologists in China, Professor Pan Ximing and Professor Huang Yingying, the higher educated you are, the more aware about body autonomy, so you're more aware about being the victim of sexual harassment. So maybe the percentage will be lower in rural China because the concept has not really set in rural China. So there might be a gap between rural China and urban China.
If you take a look at the sample you mentioned.
This 70% has been criticized by some, saying the percentage is too high. But it's mainly because she asked for the internet survey, so it's self-reported, and also it's located within urban universities in big cities.
So will that be an accurate representation of what it really is in China, or is it underestimation, overestimation?
Well, this depends on the definition of sexual harassment. The older definition mainly emphasizes quid pro quo sexual harassment, meaning the person who actually experienced or became the victim. But the impact of the quid pro quo sexual harassment could have extended to other people who did not receive immediate sexual harassment but also harmed by the mechanism. So sexual harassment actually is part of gender harassment, is part of gender discrimination. That's why if you talk about environmental sexual harassment, then up to 40 to 60% of college population actually suffered the environment, the hostile environment of sexual harassment.
All right. We're heading to a short break. Hold your thoughts. We'll be right back after this.
It started with numerous allegations against Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, and soon countless accusations of sexual misconduct began pouring in, from actor Kevin Spacey in Hollywood to politician Michael Fallon in the British Conservative Party. However, in China, sex is often a taboo issue. Although sexual harassment is illegal, according to the Chinese constitution, a lack of specific detail can lead to difficulty when victims want to appeal to the law for justice. Today, I'm going to talk to members of the public to find out what they have to say about these issues.
One of my best friends faced sexual harassment in her last workplace. Once at dinner with partner, she saw her leader put his one hand into the clothes of a girl who was on the table. And meanwhile, one director who sat beside her put his hand on the waist of my friend.
我自己在职场中还没有遇到过性骚扰，但是我就是有听到朋友的朋友，然后他有遇到过就是类似这样的情况。后来就是喝了酒之后，他上级就去他的宿舍敲门，然后就想，就是他不开门，然后宿舍就是那个他的上级还就是用很大声的就去指责他、责骂他，然后说他不懂事儿。 然后不懂得处理这些职场上的一些应酬之类的。
是有的，就是我有一个同事，他在跟客户去开会的时候，客户会把手放在他的腿上。
And she reported these things to HR department. This leader was fired, but my friend was also fired. You know, this thing happened in one famous multinational company in architectural design.
Yes, actually, I saw some similar situations in some movies, and so I think like if I was the victim of the sexual harassment, I think like I would speak out.
因为他那份工作，就是出于还是为了就是保住饭碗吧，然后这件事情就是不了了之。
这个姐姐吧，就是她是侧了一下身，就采取了一种冷处理的方式来应对这个性骚扰。
I haven't joined some training like that.
没有，之前的公司没有这样的培训。
我之前的公司跟现在的公司好像都没有这方面的培训。
To the female victims, they don't like to talk about that. I think that's because of the Chinese, we have like the traditional Chinese values in people's opinions, so they think like this is shameful to talk about.
这些事情是不太容易说得出口，他们会觉得很丢脸。
我觉得现在的人可能就是，比较会以自我为中心一些，然后就不像是之前，一些人都是比较热情。现在大家的关注点都是在自己的身上，所以就，有一点冷漠吧，所以性骚扰的事情会发生的比较多，然后大多数人也会像我一样采取冷处理的这种方式。
As we've seen, people's attitudes are changing and they're more willing to talk about these things and fight back against them. But there's still some reluctance to use a company's rules or the law in order to do so. Hopefully, as awareness begins to grow, that will begin to change. I'm Bill Neenan, CGTN.
Welcome back to Dialogue. So let me know your thoughts on this. Ms. Dunn first. Some say the sexual harassment is more about power than lust. It's more about, people feel this, powerful men feel this is part of their privilege that somehow makes them feel good about doing this.
I would certainly agree on that kind of presumption because, like, if that's a way to show the dominance and power, then in a, I would say, quite a feminist environment that in normal everyday life that we really feel very, very, very nonchalant to the topic because we never really encounter that severe, like you mentioned, 70% to me is shocking news. Yeah. But my question is also where does the border goes? Is that an invitation? There's a tension? There's office romance? We have two couples working in office coming from that. So I think we are just talking more less hostile tone of voice and looking at this man and woman dynamics.
So where is the red line?
I guess it's a the red line for me is no, and the no is real no, and then that should be should be the tagline, should be the borderline. But if we really become an over reactive to all this, and it really become a man or woman who can fight, you know, that seems not really the direction we want to see either. But what you mentioned was extremely severe, that people feel they're really victimized. But if we are really looking about the power and dominance, I do think the in our today's social environment, especially in what I'm familiar with, I think this is really less severe. Just as a sexist word is a catchword, so it became such a popular news. I would just...
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the problem I see as an outsider, okay, number one, because of the Confucian ethics, or whatever you want to call it, with this idea of a professor, I mean, let's talk about academics for a second, sort of being this god. I mean, we don't really have that much in the United States. I mean, I guess we think that they're okay, that they know a few things, but in China, it's really, and I've taught at Tsinghua, I've taught at Beijing University, and a number of other places over the years, and there's no comparison to the way...
Highly respected.
Yeah, highly respected. And so I think that there's no way to kind of, for international viewers to really understand that position that person holds, and what academics means for Chinese citizens at almost any age. We don't have that as much in the United States. So that's really daunting. But second, and this was talked about before, is what is the mechanism at the university? Is it tolerant, or is there zero tolerance? And quite frankly, it has not been instituted. Now, I remember a couple of years ago at Beijing University, or was it Tsinghua, but where one of the students was a foreign student, was Singaporean, it was a married professor. They dismissed the professor from the university, and that kind of made headline news. But that was because it was a foreigner, perhaps. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that the mechanism, we can all talk about it till the cows come home, but if we don't have a mechanism, whether it's in the United States or in China, to actually enforce some of this and have people be penalized in some way, shape, or form, then we're just free talking.
So what's been badly needed now in terms of law enforcement on curbing sexual harassment in China?
Well, first, in China, we really need clear definition of what constitutes sexual harassment, and I don't...
What would you propose?
I support this China Watch, Women Watch China NGO's definition. So they come up with 10 indices of sexual harassment, such as repeated ogling and staring to show sexual intention, such as intentionally approaching another's body, such as provoking or soliciting others with sexual suggestions via WeChat, phone, or email, such as asking for sex as benefit
so it
or
doesn't have to be physical, like verbal abuse.
Yeah, actually,
sexual harassment.
if I refer back to the survey, college students reported that only 10% of the sexual harassment came in the form of power harassment, meaning as sexual exchange from professors or senior people in charge.
Where does the sense of entitlement come from? What gives them the logic? Why do they equate power to abuse and bullying?
That's a very good question. I think it's partially related to this patriarchal ideology of, if I have power, I'm going to exercise it, I'm going to use it, I'm going to wield it on my inferior. So we can quote Bill Clinton when he was asked, why do you do that? And he said, just because I could.
Well, now, if this happens at a workplace, what can an employee do if their boss, say, exhibit some kind of inappropriate behavior towards them? Let's try to be helpful rather than just pointing out the problem.
Well, my suggestion would be always honestly, softly speak back, protect your rights, and to make it clear that the information was not wrongly perceived. Secondly, if they really to a certain level that's not really personally acceptable, that sometimes you should really speak up. Like we mentioned from the beginning, we have social media, we have this really social pressure to protect women, especially today. I don't think we do. I don't think we should feel that so victimized in this situation like this. So I guess it's simple. Speak up and really draw the borderline personally, and never really threatened by anyone higher than you or more powerful than you. Just stand up for yourself.
Speak up not just for yourself, but for the environment. If somebody making a very obviously sex joke over a dinner table, a bar party, especially from a person in a senior position, then just don't laugh at it, don't go with it, and just say, well, I don't find that funny. Or maybe someone will say this is a form of soft sexual harassment. Even if when you say it in a joking way, you remind people that this might be borderline sexual harassment. So always be ready to speak up.
But the problem is, what I'm saying is, I totally agree with you, okay, but what's the benefit for that person? Do you understand? What I'm saying is, you've got a society.
We need support systems.
Well, I mean, it's, that has been favoring having male children over female children for, I don't know, a millennium.
Centuries.
Or like, yeah, whatever, beyond that. And so where does this problem begin? I mean, where do you sort it out? And that's the whole thing. So there is no, I mean, I don't disagree that you shouldn't laugh, but then you don't get any benefit, the girl who does laugh. And what I've also seen, ironically, is that, I mean, you were asking how does it work in a workplace. So our law firm is a Chinese law firm, and we've dealt with a lot of labor and employment cases, and typically the HR manager might be a female herself. Now, women are actually really, really harsh on other women. This is not a scientific study. I don't have statistics on it, but just on the cases that I've seen. So the HR, that sometimes a woman would say, hey, that woman brought it on because there's some kind of schadenfreude, that's kind of petty jealousy between people. So it's extremely difficult. And what I'm saying is that many of the work units don't have it written in their handbooks about how you're supposed to do it. Which is completely opposite from the United States, is what not to do when you're an employer. And the way it's written in China is what the employer is foisting upon you and what your responsibilities are. It's not about what your rights are as an employee. So it's completely backwards from a lot of places.
Well, should the employer and the company held accountable or responsible when sexual harassment cases happen?
Definitely. I think a lot of companies are developing their personnel politics. And actually, according to the 80 cases filed officially, formally, through Chinese courts, somebody did an analysis of all the 80 courses. Most of the cases were dealt with very seriously and severely by big corporations, by companies.
But multinational, probably foreign corporations, I guess. I'm just only guessing.
Well, I didn't have time to go through all these 80 cases. I just read the article that analyzed the 80 cases. So, well, if they are filed, meaning they are very severe cases, right? They are open cases. Maybe there are a lot of cases that are not filed through a lot of companies. But among these 80, we can see that overall the personnel policy is really strict on sexual harassment. So I think people know what should be done, what should be avoided. People know, actually there is a general consensus on how you should use your power and how you should avoid abusing your power. But maybe the mechanism needs to be more systematized, and there should be better exercise of policy.
Thank you very much for all your insights and thoughts.
Thank you for covering this topic.
Very important topic.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Dialogue. Thank you for your company. Bye for now.